Coming up this week on Sporting Journal Radio.
I think there's a little bit of a misconception that we were trying to demonstrate that real-world fishing scenarios are bad for fish at certain depths.
And so anybody that says it's okay, they're going to say, see, he said it's okay, so now I'm going to do it.
I have a second pen where we're using a descending device to get that fish down to depth quicker.
Well, I'm inside. I'm just inside one of our SnoBears.
You never know what you're going to catch on Lake of the Woods.
I fish, I hunt, and always will. Broadcasting from the Eau Claire Outdoors Studios. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. We're not just a radio show anymore. This is Sporting Journal Radio. That's right. Welcome to the show. My name is Brett Amundsen. Thank you for tuning in on the network by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or watching this on YouTube. That's Dan Amundsen next to me over there.
What's going on?
Shoots the scores. That's David Eckhart over there.
Hello.
What's up, David?
How are you? That's so loud.
Did we give David any homework this week? Since he didn't.
Have we ever given him homework?
Probably should. How much have you prepared for this week's show, David?
Very little.
Good. Perfect. Great. All right. We got a great show. The last couple of weeks have been very, very interesting for us here on the show. We really appreciate everybody that's tuned in, that's watched, that listened, even the ones that disagreed with us. We thank you very much. And we thank you for the comments as well. And please comment below on this week's show. We got to announce a winner for last week, too. We'll do it in the comments here. But everybody who comments on this show will have a chance to win some gear from the Sporting Journal Radio. Wait a minute.
You agreed to it. I heard it. I heard it. I think there's a
cars.
Toyota Tundra given away.
There's a new Toyota Tundra, but I'm the one driving it. You can ride with me sometimes, but I'm keeping it. But you might get a cool hoodie like this, or maybe a coffee mug, or a tumbler, or a hat, t-shirt, and more. Check it all out. I actually added a bunch of dog stuff. I wanted to try out some of the dog stuff. So I got a new dog bowl on there, dog bed, some dog food mats that you put under their food and water dishes.
And when you say you're going to try them out, like you're going to sleep on them and drink out of them?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, I figure if it's good enough for my dog, it's good enough for me. So.
Oh, so you're not the one actually going to drink out of the bowl?
No, but I'll try and make sure it's good enough for Tiny Amika. And if it passes my rigorous testing, then I'll give it to the dogs. No, we got some really cool new stuff there. Check it out. Actually, some new hoodies. What else did we get, Dan? Some quarter zip stuff.
Sun shirts, right?
We
got some sun shirts on the way. So we've had requests for this, and I've requested them. Fishing shirts with hoods, SPF protection, and now we've got some we're going to test out and hopefully be able to sell to you guys with the Fish Hunt Forever logo on them. Or if you want Sporting Journal, what's this show called?
Words are tough.
Yeah, Sporting Journal Radio. That one. If you want that logo, I'm sure you can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully I just gave you more work.
Check it. Yeah, I'm going to go design now. SportingJournalRadio.com. Fish Hunt Forever. I fish, I hunt, and always will. And what that means is we're going to do what we can to protect this lifestyle that we love, hunting and fishing, and being in the outdoors as often as possible. So sometimes we disagree with some things that are going on. Sometimes we agree with it. We try to call it as we see it and make sure that we are trying to further the discussion to make sure that we are doing the right things moving forward as outdoors people. And making sure that our elected officials who might make a law are also aware of our intentions as well, too. So we do what we can to try to make sure that you can do what you want to do. And we've been talking about barotrauma the last couple of weeks on this show. We're going to continue the discussion. So it all came from a DNR research study that Angling Buzz filmed. They put the video out. Aaron Weeb from Uncut Angling responded. We had Jeremy Smith from Angling Buzz respond to that. Aaron wanted to respond to that. The only people we hadn't had on yet was the DNR. So this week, we have the DNR side of the story. Dave Weitzel is going to be joining us. And then we also have Jeff Sundin, who's been a part of some of the citizen panfish work that's been done here in the state of Minnesota. He's also a fishing guide. They're both up in the Grand Rapids area. They're going to be joining us in a little bit. Joe Henry will be back to talk about Lake of the Woods. And Lucas Mertens from Devil's Lake, from Haybale Heights Campground Resort on Devil's Lake, is going to be joining us from his SnoBear on Devil's Lake with a report from up there as well. Dan, who are the sponsors this week on the show.
Lake of the Woods Tourism. Lake of the Woods is the walleye capital. Plan a trip for this winter at Lake of the Woods or spring at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Haybell Heights Campground and Resort. Still time to book a trip to Devil's Lake. Learn more at haybellheights.com. Prairie Sportsman. We are so close to the new season coming up in January, but you can watch episodes anytime at the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel.
So here's 4 YouTube channels for you to follow and subscribe to: Prairie Sportsman, Sporting Journal Radio, Fish Hunt Forever, and then also Tazen Lake Lodge. I'm going to be doing a couple of sports shows coming up for Tazen. So if you're going to be at the Northwest Sports Show in Minneapolis this year, I'll be there at the Tazen Lake Lodge booth. And then I'm going to Chicago, too, for the All Canada show. I don't expect any of you to be there in Chicago, but maybe.
Hey, this podcast has reached a lot of people in the last few weeks.
That's true.
If you're in Chicago, go see, go check it out.
All Canada show. It's January. I think it's a January 31st through whatever that Sunday is, February 4th, or the 1st through the 4th, maybe, or something like that. So check it out.
A lot of words.
Tazen Lake, YouTube, or TazenLake.com. Also going to be at the Deer Classic. We'll talk more about the Deer Classic and deer hunting with David here in just a little bit, but we should mention some news about Red Lake this week, Dan.
Yeah, you can land an airplane again.
Okay, good.
The vehicle restriction's been lifted, so people can bring their ATVs, side-by-sides, et cetera, out of public launches. It was restricted just to resorts bringing people out, but now the public can do it again. The ice appears to have firmed up enough. Again, never assume any ice is safe ice, but you're free to go again. Follow your resort's guidelines. I know some people are letting ATVs and single axles out, so stuff's happening, and it's going to get real cold, so more stuff's going to happen.
Like highs below 0 this weekend.
Yeah.
Gross.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we need it to build some ice. We probably could have done without the snow that we got this week, but we didn't get a ton of snow.
It was a light snow. It'll blow off. We'll be fine.
Yeah, I don't know. They called for 5 to 7. I'd say we got about 6 inches here, I think, on Monday? Tuesday? I don't remember what day that was. And another inch on Wednesday or Thursday or something.
It's still light, though. It'll blow. At least out where we are in the state with not a lot of trees.
Prairie.
It'll blow.
Yeah.
Button bar.
It's like we're the Dakotas. You know, people joke about when I lived in Fargo, man, it was brutal some days when the wind would blow. And I moved here to Minnesota. It's the same.
Yeah.
Western Minnesota. Pretty much the exact same.
David's getting a phone call.
Nope.
No, that was me.
Oh, Brett's going to answer it on air.
No,
answer.
Definitely not a real person on that one. So, all right, we got a couple other things that we want to hit on. We're going to take a quick break. Before we do that, though, we should probably go up and check in with Lucas Mertens, maybe?
Yeah, let's see if he catches a fish out of the SnoBear.
All right, now it's time to head up to Devil's Lake to check in with Lucas Mertens from Haybell Heights Campground and Resort. Lucas, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm not as good as you because I'm stuck inside and you're fishing.
Well, I'm inside. I'm just inside one of our SnoBears. So
That's pretty cool. You know, those SnoBears, first time I was ever in one was at your place up there. That's a pretty slick way to go. Pretty comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when you come up here and you get a SnoBear trip, I mean, you're going to pretty much eliminate the weather factor is the advantage that we have. We've had a pretty nice, mild winter, but as we all know, there's a big Arctic blast coming down, and we're going to be 21 to 25 below zero. And as you can see, I'm sitting in a sweatshirt and t-shirt, or a sweatshirt and tennis shoes. That's the nice thing about the SnoBears. It just lets you go out and enjoy your day, no matter how cold it is out there.
Yeah, I think when we were up there, I mean, this is a couple of years ago now, but I think we had like a 45 below wind chill or something like that. Yeah. It was, North Dakota winter, of course. It was brutal, but it was, we hopped in there and you get to move around, and it was pretty warm and comfortable. That was a couple of years ago now. I know you've gotten a couple of new SnoBears. Is that that looks like a newer one than the one we were in, Lucas?
Yeah, we try to keep the fleet up to date, I guess. I mean, we run them every day, so we get some hours and some miles on them. I guess a lot of the new features now there's live scopes in all of them. Some guys are still using the Vexilars. I still like the Vexilar. I'm still a Vexilar guy, but that live scope sure just makes it, it's kind of like playing a video game all day is what it is.
It's so much fun. And I can imagine what a school of perch looks like on a live scope too. Can you give us a little look? Can we look around that SnoBear a little bit? I want to see what these newer ones look like.
Sure. Yep. So let's see.
For our radio listeners.
Yeah, this is great. Great.
Go
to YouTube.
Watch us on YouTube.
Basically, as the guide or the captain here, he's going to sit up front, and then you got room for 3 other guys to fish in there. And then this one has 3 different screens for the live scope.
Wow.
You got one there, and then you got the one there, and then there's one in the very back there. So the guy in the back corner there can see the screen too.
So you're running one live scope?
One live scope, yep. So we got 5 total holes in these bears is what we got.
I like the chairs. I don't think you had the chairs last time when we were there.
I think I could sit in one of those chairs all day pretty comfortably.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that was one thing we found as we took more and more people out and spent more time in them. Just the more comfortable we can make them, the more comfortable our clients are. They all have two heat sources now. So there's floor heat, and then there's your forced air furnace. So on those real cold days, if your feet are cold, we'll just throw that floor heat on, and that sure makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Because I remember sitting in a sweatshirt and just regular pants or whatever, but my feet got a little cold. I remember wearing my heavy boots, I think, last time we were up there. So that floor heat would be nice.
Right. And we're putting aqua traction floors in them now, and that seems to keep them a little bit warmer too. So,
gosh, that's nice. How's fishing? How have things been? How's our ice kind of came late this year so far. How's it been up there?
Well, we typically start our season the day after Christmas, and it was kind of nip and tuck. Everybody was a little nervous. We were probably sitting with 8 inches at the time, with some places being open. But Devil's Lake, we've been fortunate enough to not get any snow, and that's really helped our ice. I'm currently, I measured it before we came on, and I'm sitting on 13 inches right now is what I'm at.
Okay. How?
So,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that. So what I'm doing out today is I'm just going out. Our perch are kind of sliding a little bit deeper now. We were fishing in that 18 to 22 foot range, and they're still holding in there. But I'm just going out and looking for spots today that we haven't hit this year yet, just to see if there's a new school there. All the other SnoBears are out. They're actually on some pretty good fish today. Some perch and some walleyes. So, but I'm just kind of out doing the scouting, I guess.
Well, that's not a bad gig.
No, need help?
No.
We'll come help you scout.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. How the walleye fishing's been pretty good?
Yep. Yeah, walleye fishing's been pretty standard. Looking for some structure. And that anywhere from 6 feet up to 20 foot. Where we've been hitting some walleyes, buckshots, and minnow heads have been just the key. For us, it's been just kind of standard Devil's Lake procedure.
Sure. All right. And how are things going? It's been kind of a weird year. I know I've talked to some different places that have, people have either, canceled or whatever, had to push off or waited to book. Do you have, if people wanted to come up, do you have some openings and get them out?
We can probably sneak them in February. We're not 100% full, but we are getting close. But you always have an open date here or there. You might have a big group that comes in and you might have just a kind of an off day. So we do day trips too. If you're just up in Devil's Lake, for the day, we can take you out for a day trip, or we can set you up with one of our packages where we're going to put you in our cabins and take you fishing and just take care of you while you're up here.
They're nice cabins, comfortable. I was really impressed with those when we stayed there a couple of years back. I hope this year too, we waited so long to get good ice. I hope you get good ice until April. I hope you have a good March and it goes late. I know a couple of years ago, I feel like you had a lot of bonus time. We had a real cold winter and the ice stayed late, it seemed like. But so hopefully you have a pretty good March up there this year too. I know that can be really good up there on Devil's Lake, Lucas.
Well, usually if Mother Nature is going to even things out, we're probably going to maybe have a cooler spring. So, yeah, we might get, especially if we don't get any snow, we're going to build some ice really fast this next 10 days. I would say a week from now, we'd probably be sitting on 24 inches is where we'll be at with the temperatures and no snow cover.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know we were scheduled to do some filming next week, and we're going to go out with the DNR, and they're like, it's going to be 0. I think we're going to push it back if maybe the following week. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm just fine with that. So, all right. Well, what if people want to book a trip with you? What should they do? What should they know? What do they need to know?
Sure. So we have a Facebook page, and I keep that fairly updated in the winter. I'm not going to put all the pictures on there, but I'm just going to tease you enough. So then go to our Facebook page. We have our website, and that has all our prices on it and different packages. Or if they just want to call and chat with somebody, they can call me, and my phone number is 701-351-3130.
HayBaleHeights.com, Lucas Mertens. Good luck out there today, and thanks for being on the show this week.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Ice fishing season is here. This winter, plan a trip to Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Not only will you have the chance to catch their legendary perch, but this year, Haybale Heights has been catching big walleye after big walleye. And they're doing it from a mobile, comfortable SnoBear. No matter how cold it is outside, you're warm and toasty on the inside. Learn more and book a trip today at HayBaleHeights.com. That's HayBaleHeights.com. We're back. This is Sporting Journal Radio. Thanks for tuning in on the radio network by demand at sportingjournalradio.com or maybe watching this on YouTube. Please like it, subscribe to us, and share it. And comment below, and we will draw a winner from all the commenters, and they'll get some free gear from the Sporting Journal Radio store. Hey, what other website that you can subscribe to get some outdoor updates is the Outdoor Feed at theoutdoorfeed.org. It's through the organization Aglow. It's comprised of over 500 members of outdoor content creators, writers, brands, companies, tourism destinations, and every day we put up new news from the outdoors on that website right there. If you're watching this, you can see it at theoutdoorfeed.org. And one thing, like if you're in the outdoor industry, maybe you're a content creator, maybe you're a podcast host, whatever the case is, you should consider joining Aglow because it allows you to network with other industry professionals, learn from them, grow from them, and helps you get introduced to different sponsor opportunities, different brands. And we do these things called media camps. And this year we've got another media camp coming up in February at Lake of the Woods. We'll be at Riverbend Resort February 12th through the 15th. We're going to be doing some fishing. We're going to be learning more about the Lake of the Woods area, and all these writers and people are going to be filming and gathering content and then going back home and putting all that information out. So you're going to get to learn more about Lake of the Woods through them, and they're going to be going to there. Maybe they live out east. Maybe they live in Texas. Maybe they live somewhere else. That's the beauty of what these media camps do. So maybe you're a destination. You want to host one of these camps and get messaging about your location out to these different areas across the United States and Canada. And I think we have people like in Australia or Norway or something too.
I have talked to, there's one person I know I talked to with an Australian accent at one Aglow conference. I think Canada's represented a little bit, but we could always use more Canadians. It's the more diverse the group is, the better. More hunt. Don't look at me like that.
No, you're right.
And I say that like, if we get more anglers, more hunters, you get a guy, Frank Campbell's a perfect example for us. We met him and we went to New York to go fishing.
New York City.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like Buffalo, Niagara.
Right, but I never thought of going to New York to go fishing.
Right.
And now it's a destination I want to go back to again and again and again. And it really opens us all up to these opportunities. We can teach our audience, Minnesotans, Iowans, Dakotans, Wisconsinites, about going to... Your wife wants to go to Niagara Falls for the honeymoon or something? That's not all a bad deal. Go fish.
Niagara River's amazing.
And eat the best pizza you've ever had.
That's right. So find out more at theoutdoorfeed.org. You can sign up to get email updates. while you're there, and it's usually a lot of those come from me. Just full disclosure. All right.
You just ruined the appeal.
That's one thing we're doing in February. And then in March, we'll be at the Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic. That's back this year, March 8th, 9th, and 10th. And that's going to be at Canterbury Park in Shakopee. Really cool location. You know, that when it was at the State Fairgrounds, it was kind of neat, but it was, you had to go into St. Paul. Parking was a little weird when it was up in Blaine. It was a little bit different. Man, Canterbury is just great. It's a big location. Parking is awesome. It's easy to get to. So we'll be there. I think I'm going to be out there on that Saturday and kind of bouncing around, making another film. Like if you go to mndeerclassic.com, you'll see a video I filmed while we were out there right on the homepage, and you can get a walkthrough of the event. I don't know if Dan's going to pull it up. Or not.
I can. Yeah, I was going to say, I was making a funny that you just want to go bet on the ponies. That's why you really like it at Canterbury.
That's hilarious.
Thanks.
Nailed it, Dan.
Is that right?
I thought that was funny. You have a gambling problem was the joke.
Do I? I love to gamble.
You don't, but the listeners don't know that. And now they're all laughing, but instead of at you, they're laughing at me. So
dynamite delivery, Dan.
Well, I'm sorry. You know what? I bet somebody in their car laughed their butt off. Well, and now they're just laughing at me because you two don't have the sense of humor to understand it. And
at least you can laugh at yourself, Dan.
Something like that.
I don't do that.
So, Deer Classic. Well, I'll be at the outdoor news booth for a couple of hours there, and then I'm going to be bouncing around. And then they want me to stop by the Awful Watching Program booth as well. And if you don't know about this, it's Awful, OFFAL. Oh yeah, here's the walkthrough.
Sorry, it's a little late because I got a little delayed in being made fun of. Must like my jokes.
Yeah. So you can watch this walkthrough. I think it might be on our Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel as well, or Sporting Journal Radio. Anyway, if you go to mndeerclassic.com, you can watch it. And then the Awful Watching Program, it's about what's eating your deer's gut piles. So after you kill a deer, you got it. What's eating that stuff? They just want to know. So they put cameras on them, which I've done. I've been part of this project now. And Dan, I sent you one video. We had a deer carcass.
Shoot, you're right.
That.
Hang on. Keep talking.
Okay. Well, you just said hang on. So I was hanging on.
I'm hanging on. You keep talking.
Oh, keep talking.
You keep doing the show.
Is that right? So it was a skunk eating on the deer car. And I just said the carcass. This wasn't necessarily gut pile. So this is more. So coyotes joined in on the fun here. And the skunk didn't like that too much. So it was kind of like a battle between these skunks and the coyote. And if you look at that, the skunk kind of raises his backside, raises his tail. And you see the coyote whip his nose up in the air. But I've been down to that site, and there's no scent of a skunk anywhere. So I don't know if it was like a bluff charge type of situation, and the coyote was like, "Oh, no, we're good. We're good.
Yeah.
I don't smell anything. Don't get the tomato juice out. We're good. We're good."
I think that's actually a thing. Like, oh, my camera died. God, we've just burned through camera batteries today.
It's been a long show.
Anyways, I think that's actually a thing because I was turkey hunting once and walked right up on a skunk, and the tail immediately went up, and I ran about as fast as I think I've ever run out of there, but it didn't spray. And so that might
posture.
Yeah.
They'll threaten you before they act.
It's like pulling a handgun, I suppose, before you shoot.
Mm-hmm. Just letting you know I'm locked and loaded.
Yeah,
they're brandishing.
Much.
Yeah.
And it worked. I ran away very fast.
Well, it's funny if you watch that video, and I've got more videos from that trail camera. The coyotes did not go in there until a while later, a couple of days later, and the skunk wasn't around, but a mink was around, and my camera died. I'm just so angry about it. The camera died, but there's a dead mink.
The mink is no longer around.
Yeah. The coyotes picked that thing clean because I had cameras all around leading up to this spot that had coyotes all over the camera. So I know coyotes went to that site. And I went down there, and there's just a dead mink laying there.
He passed.
Coyotes did some damage to a mink, which is crazy. So anyway, learn more about that program. There's a website out there. We'll be filming it for Prairie Sportsmen, and I'll be at the booth at the Minnesota Deer Classic 8th, 9th, and 10th. And David, I know real quick, you've been working on food plots already?
Yeah. Season ended and there was no snow. The ground was frozen. I needed to move a few down trees to kind of open up a area and make it to where I could get a food plot planted in there, make a trail in and stuff. So I thought, hey, Might as well do it now.
No such thing as an off season.
That's right. That's right.
The season's closed, so next best thing is to get ready for next year. And yeah, went and cleared out an area. I'm pretty excited about it.
So as soon as you're ready, you'll be able to start planting.
Yeah. Yep.
What are you going to plant in there?
I think I'm just going to do clover in that one. It's kind of a small little staging area before they head out into some big egg fields. So
is that now? Why would you do? Is that because is there a canopy? Is it going to be a little bit harder to grow something different?
Yeah, it's still pretty wooded, but it's open enough. I mean, there's grass growing and stuff in there, so there's enough sunlight for some to grow something. And I wanted to plant something that's I maybe don't have to come back and plant every year. Little low maintenance.
That's the best.
Yeah. That's, I think, the angle I'm going to take on that one.
Isn't it funny? I said this last week too. Isn't it funny that when the hunting season ends, how productive a guy can be? Start getting projects done that have been on the list, or take advantage of no snow this year to get something done like that. All right. Well, we got a lot to get to this week. Dave Weitzel and Jeff Sundin coming up to continue the barotrauma talk. We'll talk about that DNR study and get the DNR's perspective on the entire situation. And we got to talk to Joe Henry right now. All right, now we're going to check in with Joe Henry from Lake of the Woods Tourism to see how things are going up at Lake of the Woods. Joe, how you doing?
You know what? Doing really good. You know, I'll tell you something. You know, the old saying is, you never know what you're going to catch on Lake of the Woods. And I'll tell you what, this last week or so, boy, I'll tell you what, is that holding true?
Oh, yeah. I know Dan told me about the first one, and then as I brought it up to him again, I think the next day, he's like, oh, and did you hear what else they caught? So when you have a body of water that big and it's part of a river system, obviously fish are going to be moving in and out. And I've always been really excited about lake trout up on the Canadian side and obviously muskie fishing up there too. But turns out you don't have to go to Canada to catch those fish, Joe.
No. Well, and you know, you're right. River system, and I would say that probably pertains as much to the lake sturgeon as anything. But then, you know, yeah, you got 14,552 islands. You got really deep water up in Canada. And in the winter, if we're going to catch a lake trout, as an example, on the south end of Lake of the Woods, it's in the winter. And the reason for that is the water temps, obviously, under the ice are fairly consistent. So that fish can be roaming around under the same temperature of water. So we get one every once in a while in the South Shore Lake of the Woods. The other one that was a big surprise is Lake of the Woods is known as a muskie fishery. But that's up by the northwest angle, up amongst the 14,000 islands. You know, not on the South Shore. We don't get a lot of them in the South Shore. But I'll tell you, this last week or so, a 10-year-old girl from Rice Lake, Wisconsin, pulled in a 50-plus inch muskie on a tip-up. And you take a look, if you're looking at this, on your computer, your phone, or whatever, I'll tell you what, that muskie is huge. It is a freaking tank.
Looks as big as her.
It is as big as her. I mean, it's a big fish, you know. But the 10-year-old caught that, so kind of fun, you know. I saw an interview, and Dad said, "Yeah, you know, we saw the fish go under the hole, and it was like lighter colored, and we didn't get a good look at it, but it was big." And then, you know, we got that fish back and kind of realized it was a muskie, and it just so happened that when we pulled it back to the hole, the head was just positioned right. It kind of came up the hole and gave me a shot at grabbing it, under the gills there and pulling out of that hole, and it worked out. So, but what a fish, though, huh?
Pretty one too. Like, that's a gorgeous, gorgeous muskie.
Beautiful fish, big fish, you know. But you know, I tell you, and of course, we've been getting a lot of sturgeon. I've been getting some sturgeon photos coming in. You know, people ice fishing on the lake actually, and of course, we obviously our bread and butter is our walleyes and saugers and jumbo perch. People are catching eel pout and then the poor man's lobster, of course, and that's a little bit unique for some anglers. They can't catch them everywhere, and but I got to tell you, fishing's been really good. You know, as a whole, for a while there, around the first of the year, we were kind of stuck at a certain depth, you know, and we were catching fish. But as time would go on, fishing was getting a little bit tougher. We'd be beating on those fish. Those fish are moving, etc. Well, finally, we got some cold weather, and ice conditions were improving, so allowed our resorts and outfitters to move their fish houses to some different territories, some different ice, and got a little bit deeper and such. And I tell you, those fish were there. They just slid out a little bit deeper, and it's been really good fishing so far. And I should say too, same thing up at the northwest angle. I mean, I just spoke to my brother, and he had a buddy of his who was fishing at one of the resorts up there. He said, "Geez, I think it's probably the best fishing we've ever had so far." I mean, it's been really good so far fishing.
So, Joe, we're coming up for an Aglow event in February. And of course, I want to catch some walleyes. I love to eat walleyes. I want to catch some so we can have a good fish fry at Riverbend. But I just came up with a new idea.
Oh, boy. I don't like when you say that.
I want to go to Lake of the Woods now, and I want to try to catch. I want to get a lake trout, a muskie, a sturgeon, and a burbot.
Well, that's cool. So what I would do, first thing I'd tell you, you can, I would focus your muskie up at the northwest angle in the summer. I'd go to the Ontario side of Lake of the Woods, head over to Whitefish Bay, head out of the northwest angle. There's guys that'll take you over there in the summer. That'll work. Or you can do it in the winter too. Guys will snowmobile you over there, take you over there. That's where you're going to get those fish. And then the other ones you'll get in the South Shore, no problem. Obviously, you want to get your eel pout in the winter. You don't catch a lot of eel pout in the open water. Although we did during
this spring, we did.
Spring, in the river, we caught a bunch. Now, we didn't catch big eel pout. Those are kind of the smaller ones, kind of the nursery.
That was so crazy, Joe. And I'm sure it happens more often than we realize, but that seemed just wild for us to catch all those burbot in the rainy river.
And everyone doing it on the same day.
Every boat.
That was so, we were up there for 3 days and nobody caught any. And all of a sudden the one day it was like, hey, who caught a sturgeon or a eel pout? And everyone's hands go up.
Yeah.
Like, huh? Weird.
Yeah. There were a lot up there. The one thing I'll say is that the water was still ice cold. There was still ice floating down the river. So in that regard, and the fish were smaller fish. For listeners who don't know, really those eel pout are fairly inactive during the open water season. You almost always, when you catch them, it's through the ice, and they even spawn under the ice. So to catch one in the open water is a little bit rare. I mean, it certainly happens, but for us to catch all those, eel pout in the river, of course, it was early spring, in April. But that was during that Sporting Journal Radio 500, that annual spring fishing tournament you have. I should say, too, if folks, when you're fishing that rainy river, you can easily do that in a 16-foot boat, and you don't have to travel far. That's one of those little tournaments in the spring that if you ever want to join it, that's a fun one. And it's casual, and you're rubbing elbows with guys like Brett Amundsen. You're rubbing elbows with guys like Danny, Freddie Amundsen because of the mustache. I mean, what else could be better?
I'll tell you what, Joe. I've just started to put things together for that tournament, and so the SJR 500 is going to be back again, third annual this year, Riverbend Resort. Although it's open to anyone fishing the Rainy River, April 9th and 10th. So it's that last Tuesday and Wednesday before walleye season closes on the Rainy River. We'll have more details coming out. It's through Fish Donkey. You'll be able to get all the info at sportingjournalradio.com.
Did you say details?
When does the walleye season close on the Rainy River, for those people that don't know?
Oh, it's April 14th.
That's correct. April 14th. Yes. So you can actually, and that's actually a good thing, though, all kidding aside, Lake of the Woods enjoys an extended ice fishing season, first off. So our fish houses, certain parts of Minnesota, inland, you have to have your fish houses off towards the end of February. They cannot be overnight on the ice. Up at Lake of the Woods, we get a whole extra month. So we get to March 31st to have houses overnight on the ice up at Lake of the Woods. And then we also have some extended seasons because of us being border water with Canada. Number one, our walleye and sauger season goes to April 14th. And our pike season never closes. So, I say that just because, people didn't get if you didn't get a good start on the ice fishing season because of thin ice conditions, I'll tell you what, you can always, get those extra trips in March, and with some of the colder weather we have coming up, we're hoping that, our ice will last into March very, very well. You remember last year, I've been out in March where you got a sunburn. Last year, it was still like winter conditions towards the end of March. I mean, we could have fished well into April. People were worried that we wouldn't lose our ice by the fishing opener last year.
Yeah, well, we were watching it intently for the tournament last year. Of course, the year before, we fished in that snowstorm in April, and then last year, we were, they were taking chunks. They were opening up the accesses with excavators and heavy equipment. And I'll never forget, Joe, that sturgeon that I caught last year, and we were anchored in the river, and I hooked into this sturgeon, and then all of a sudden these chunks of ice just started beating the sides of Dan's boat and going around us. And Dan's just furiously trying to get the anchor up and put the troller down so we could get out into the middle of the river to fight this fish, because I'm working it around big chunks of ice. And it was a wild video. What's that?
Yeah.
You got it in, right?
We got her in. Yeah, we landed
Somehow.
it all on camera. You can see it on the Fish Hunt Forever
Yep.
channel.
Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channels. Like, share, subscribe, please.
That's absolutely correct. And Joe, obviously people are going to want
to say one thing, though. I got to tell you, and this is kind of neat. 2 years ago, when you and I fished together one day, or maybe 2 days, but we remember it was really snowing out, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, oh, geez, I mean, God, it's been nice out, and we're going to be up there during the snow. I'll tell you what, once we're out there, of course, had the ice fishing gear on, it wasn't bad. It was absolutely spectacular, beautiful. And the photography it made with the snow coming down, holding those nice golden walleyes. Remember how we have some photos of the walleyes, you pull them out of the water, you hold them up to the camera, and those fins are straight up. They're so golden. I mean, such nice photography.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And it did make for really cool footage for filming and taking photos. And then even last year with the ice chunks and the real blue sky.
Sunburn.
We did get sunburn last year.
It was bad.
Remember the year that God, who was it that made we got some suckers,
Corey.
Sturgeon,
Corey.
That was the first year.
And
Corey Loeffler.
Yeah, we actually big sucker. Everybody had big sucker, and of course, I don't know if the big sucker was really that good, or if it was the time of the night he
Oh, I remember it being pretty good. David probably got the best piece, though.
Oh yeah, that cheek meat.
Ugh.
God, we have fun at Lake of the Woods.
Danny, hold on, Danny. That's the plate you're eating, not the sucker. Here, a little bit over. There you go.
I'm actually not sure I had any. I think I filled up at the restaurant.
No, I would do it again. I had no problem. You know, so many of those things, it's all in how you prepare it, and so much of it is mental. When you hear about it being a rough fish, usually it's just because they're bony. I mean, even people eat carp around the world, but they're such a pain in the backside because they're so bony. And walleyes have such a mild flavor, and they're so easy to cut the bones out. That's I think what's made them so popular. So I would eat sucker again, no problem. I just don't want to clean it or cook it.
No.
Yeah.
But I would eat it. Corey, come up with us this year and make sucker for the entire tournament.
We have fun at Lake of the Woods every time. I don't think I've ever been there and had a bad time. Have you, Joe?
No,
I have.
The stories we have. I mean, we do. We have a lot of stories. And I'll tell you, when I say everybody's welcome, it's a very small group that ends up together at Riverbend. And Brett and Danny put on their radio show live from Riverbend that one night. And heck, there's probably 20 people in the sidelines, kind of 20, 30 people hanging out, just watching, having a couple drinks, whatever. And it's really kind of a neat atmosphere. And of course, everybody's talking fishing, and just a very, very, everybody's competitive, but it's very, very laid back tournament. It's very enjoyable.
Probably some live music from Greg Jones, I suppose.
Sure.
Yeah, Greg's always playing.
Well, that'll be April 9th and 10th, Riverbend Resort, open to anyone through the Fish Donkey app. More details coming at sportingjournalradio.com. And Joe, if people want to get a trip booked this winter to Lake of the Woods or start thinking about spring too, what should they do?
Ice conditions are great. Fish are biting, and there's openings. There are openings right now. Check out our website, and that is lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Lake of the Woods, the walleye capital of the world, is calling out to you. From the northwest angle to the South Shore and Rainy River, this is the Midwest's #1 ice fishing destination. Walleyes, sauger, perch, northern pike, and eelpout. The fishing on Lake of the Woods is like a world of its own. Experience the most amazing fishing through one of the many full-service resorts featuring heated fish houses, ice transportation, meal plans, and sleeper fish house options. For more information, go to lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
This is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Brett Amundsen. Thanks for tuning in on the network, by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or by downloading the podcast or watching this on YouTube. Thank you very much. Everyone that does watch this, comment below, like it, share it. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Everyone who comments on this will win something from the Sporting Journal Radio store, where you can win maybe a pretty cool hoodie like this one right here, or hats, tumblers, mugs, things like that. Check it out at sportingjournalradio.com. Dan Amundsen and David Eckhart with us. And right now we got two guests coming, both from Grand Rapids, as a matter of fact. We're going to talk fishing. We're going to continue the barotrauma talk because we feel like it's a pretty important topic to discuss and get people talking about it, thinking about how their actions on the lake may or may not affect fish populations out there. And we just want to learn more and learn what might already be out there when it comes to the research and data regarding barotrauma. So first we got Dave Weitzel. He's the assistant regional fisheries manager of the northern region. Did I get that right?
Yep, the Northeast region.
Northeast. I knew it. I was like, that word doesn't look right. I don't know why I can't read my own handwriting. That's terrible.
I know why.
Because my handwriting's garbage?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. In this day and age, I type more than I write. So when I do write something down, half the time I'm like, that's not spelled right.
no autocorrect.
Where's
on
the
paper.
autocorrect in this thing? It's broken. Jeez. Whoops. And that's Jeff Sundin joining us as well down there. Both of you guys up in that Grand Rapids area. Jeff, Dave, both of you guys, thanks for coming on the show this week.
Hey, thanks for having us.
I appreciate it. Dave, I want to start with you because we've had Angling Buzz on the show, and then we had Aaron Wiebe on the show, and the one component of this overall topic that started, just kind of got this whole ball rolling when it comes to the barotrauma talk as we are talking right now, is this video and some research being done by the Minnesota DNR. And that Angling Buzz went out and filmed to get the word out just a little bit. So I'm glad to have the DNR to kind of discuss a little bit. So thanks for coming on. Let's just kind of start at the beginning. This particular barotrauma study that's taking place, how did this come about?
Yeah, basically, for folks that have been kind of following some of our panfish management here in Minnesota, you've probably heard of the work that we've been doing the last few years with bluegill. So we had kind of this citizens advisory work group driven bluegill project that was kind of winding down. So as a group, we discussed with our stakeholders, work group members, and just other anglers, where do we go from here? And kind of the next thing that they wanted us to take a look at was crappie, because, when we look at angling across the state, walleye is still the most popular species, but bluegill and crappie are right up there with walleye. And, a lot of folks understand that our crappie populations get a heck of a lot of fishing pressure. So we wanted to kind of have that discussion and see, how does all this fishing pressure potentially impact our crappie populations, and are we managing the species in the right way? So when we started to look at crappie, what we came to quickly realize is, from a biological standpoint, we actually don't understand them to the degree that we understood the bluegill. There's a lot of data gaps out there. These fish, unlike bluegill, which are fairly consistent, crappie react different in different environments. So like in my part of the state, what we see is that our crappie populations tend to be really cyclical. We might get a good year class once every 3 to 5 years, whereas maybe out in western Minnesota, they see good production every year. In some lakes, we see that our crappies are growing relatively fast. In other lakes, it might take 10 years even to grow a 9-inch fish. And then the lifespan's really different from one lake to another. Around here, it's pretty rare to see crappie living beyond 7 years. But there's other parts of the state where we see them living to be teenagers. So we really came to understand that if we're going to do a better job of focusing management on crappie, we need to understand more about where crappie management may work and what tools might be appropriate in different environments. And we knew that this barotrauma question was a big one, because we know that there's a lot of lakes out there that have deep water basins where anglers like to go and fish for crappie. Well, we kind of have to understand how that barotrauma may impact the fish to come up with better tools for crappie management. And then the other thing that our work group pointed out is that, they felt that maybe a lot of anglers really hadn't ever been exposed to barotrauma or didn't know what it was. So they were hoping we could use it to come up with some really good outreach material so that people would have the conversation and really think about how that deep water fishing might impact the population, and from a personal standpoint, whether they want to focus more on harvest when they're fishing in deep water, avoid it altogether, or just be able to make a better informed decision when they're out there fishing deep water.
I joke a lot that the DNR has okay, so I want to state for the record that I criticize the DNR when I feel like the DNR needs to be criticized, but I also give credit when I feel like the DNR deserves to have some credit. I try to call it as I see it, and I will say that managing a state the resources in a state like Minnesota is tough because it's so diverse with the different biomes and the different landscapes and the different depths and water temperatures and things like that. You can't have a one size fits all management plan in this state, can you?
No, and that's what we've learned, and people are very used to and very comfortable with kind of our statewide limits. But in reality, they're a good first line of defense. But in places where anglers might value the fishery a little bit differently, for example, if you really value catching large bluegill, the statewide 20 fish limit is probably insufficient to maintain that in a lot of lakes. And that's where really understanding the individual lake and really understanding how people value those individual fisheries allows us to tailor management on a more individual level and be sure that we're producing the kind of fisheries that people value. And that's the ultimate goal. The best management occurs where there's the biological potential to do some kind of management action to produce a result, and that result is something that people desire. We want to be sure that both of those criteria are being met.
Yeah, this study came out from essentially from your anglers, so your citizen work group, right? I mean, and that you work with the DNR. I mean, this didn't come from the DNR. It came from the anglers, and then the DNR put the study together.
Yeah, that's correct. We have a citizens advisory work group that specifically talks about issues related to panfish. It's just one of many work groups that the DNR has. These work groups are purposely designed to include a diversity of viewpoints from the fishing community. So we have resort owners, we have fishing guides, we have just everyday anglers, we have lakeshore owners, we have folks that don't live on the lake. Trying to bring everybody together to identify, what issues are they seeing with our panfish populations that maybe they'd like to see the DNR put more focus on. And this was one of those issues.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the study methods in particular, because obviously there were a few things that were pointed out. The vertical hoop net, and then forward-facing sonar, of course, became a big part of the conversation. And in reality, it's probably two separate issues, and we're going to focus on the technology later. But I want to get into the study, the methods and what you use, particularly that net. Let's just talk about what the goals were of that research. What were you trying to find out?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a misconception that we were trying to demonstrate that real-world fishing scenarios are bad for fish at certain depths. But in reality, it's really very difficult to replicate real-world fishing conditions and still be able to recover those fish sometime later. We know that a lot of mortality might not occur instantly and that fish might be dying over a 24 or 48-hour period. So in able to evaluate that, we need to be able to have some way of recovering these fish. And net pens are a common way that's been done in previous studies, so that's the method that we chose to work. But we talked about this with the understanding that it's a confounding factor that in and of itself could contribute to higher mortality. So the numbers that we came up with were never really meant to be literally interpreted that if I'm out angling and I'm immediately releasing fish, that I'm going to see the exact same mortality that the DNR saw in their study. But what it does demonstrate, and probably a better talking point, is that the physical damage caused by that barotrauma became much more evident at greater depths. And that was consistent with other studies that we've seen, primarily from open water systems or studies that were conducted during open water times of year, I should say, where it seems like we don't see a lot of barotrauma issues at depths shallower than about 25 feet. But once we get beyond 30 feet, those effects are much more evident.
I think one thing that I've been trying to glean from any sort of research and data that I've seen out there is what that magic number is and what affects that magic number. How much a depth may be where it may be evident that at this depth on this particular body of water, this is where barotraumatic effects take place. Maybe it's different on this lake. Is it different on that lake? Is it different by size of fish? I want you to answer some of those questions. We've got to take a quick break, but we will come back, and then we'll bring Jeff Sundin on in the conversation as well. Dave Weitzel with us on Sporting Journal Radio. More on the way. 852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. Don't miss the 2024 Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic, presented by Select Heartland Chevy Dealers at Canterbury Park in Shakopee, March 8th, 9th, and 10th. This year's Classic features top hunting celebrities like Pat Nicole Reeve of Driven TV, Melissa Bachman of Winchester Deadly Passion TV, and legendary bow hunter Barry Wenzel. Get your antlers scored, view more than 300 antler entries, and see the latest hunting products, plus a great lineup of lodges and outfitters. Learn more about the Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic, March 8th, 9th, and 10th at Canterbury Park in Shakopee at mndeerclassic.com. We're back. This is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Brett Amundsen. We're talking about barotrauma and some recent research being done by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and the subsequent video from Angling Buzz, and then the subsequent interview and video from Aaron Wiebe. And then now we have the DNR discussing it with us right now. We touched on some of the study methods before the break. And then I think we started to talk about what depth you might start to see barotrauma affect fish. And you brought up that 30-foot number a few times. How consistent do you think that depth range is? And do you think water temperature, size of fish, type of fish, body of water, how many other factors do you think affect that? Or do you think it's pretty common no matter where you go?
Well, I think from the standpoint of barotrauma in and of itself, keep in mind it's the weight of the water that's above the fish that's being reduced as the fish is brought from a deep depth to a shallow depth. And it's the change in pressure that allows those gases to expand. So that's really consistent regardless of temperature or other conditions. Now, with that being said, mortality on fish is affected by a ton of different variables. So if we were talking about real-world fishing scenarios, it's really hard to say that mortality rate is going to be the same from one outing to the next, because everything from handling time to, certainly water temperature, where the fish was hooked, all of those things have a huge bearing on the overall health of that fish when it's returned to the water. But the barotrauma itself, the amount of pressure change that's occurring, that's fairly consistent. So the studies that I've seen suggest that around 30 feet we start to see those physical impacts increasing.
Is there any research out there that shows some safe handling measures, getting the fish back in the water, that may reduce mortality? I mean, obviously, fish stressors are going to affect mortality, and keeping the fish out of the water longer obviously is going to have an impact. But where do you think, is there any research that shows that there's variables that barotrauma, if you catch 10 fish out of 30 feet of water, are they all going to be affected the same? Or how can we determine, is there anything out there trying to tell us what's changing the effect on different fish? Does that make sense? Am I making sense with that?
Yeah, and I know there's been some studies from primarily marine settings that have tried different descending devices. There's been some studies that have looked at fizzing, and in some of those cases, there have been methods that seem to really help. But not a lot of it's been done in freshwater, so I think it's a little too soon to reach any conclusions with that, because the physiology of our fish are a little bit different than some of these marine fish, so it's probably a little too early to tell.
I've seen a couple of research studies come out that talk about venting or fizzing. I've heard some podcasts lately. I saw some people are selling fizz kits. I think they were more or less talking about bass, but I've always kind of been in the impression that fizzing can't really be healthy for any fish species. I mean, putting a hole in a swim bladder sure seems to be counterproductive to I mean, maybe it gives them a chance, gets them back down to the bottom, and that's, a last resort type measure, such as a descending device as well. But I mean, I guess if it were me and I was down to a descending device or a fizz, I'm going to use the device 100% of the time. But is there any positive data out there that fizzing or venting can be beneficial?
Not that I'm aware of from the kind of fish that we'd have here in Minnesota. And we did try fizzing on kind of a small subset of the crappie last year. And what we found is those fish swam down to depth, more or less immediately. But unfortunately, because the swim bladder was ruptured, after 24 hours, all of those fish were dead. So in the case of crappie, at least, it seemed like the physical damage to the swim bladder was such that it was contributing to mortality.
Okay. Yeah. I just feel like you're putting a hole in a pretty vital part of a fish's body that, when it comes to buoyancy and being able to swim up and down a water column, it's a pretty important part of their body that you're damaging.
And it's extremely fragile. If I don't know if you've ever maybe filleted a fish that was caught in deep water and been able to observe the swim bladder when it's expanded.
Oh yeah.
But it's paper thin, maybe the thickness of like a plastic grocery bag. So it's very easy for that to become damaged, and once it's damaged, it's probably hard for the fish to recover from that.
All right, I want to get back to the study here in a second, and then also talk about the panfish work that you've been a part of. But I want to get Jeff on. Jeff's been waiting patiently to come on the show. Jeff Sundin, I appreciate you coming on. You've been fishing for a long time, so from an angler and a guide perspective, what are your thoughts on barotrauma?
Well, I run parallel to a lot of the things that Dave was just saying. There's a couple of little details that I came into this maybe 10 or 12 years, started writing about my website when I ran into Bob Mesa one time down at the Minneapolis Sports Show. We were just having a casual chat, and I mentioned something about catching northerns in deep water. And he looked at me, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go down there. Don't fish for those deep fish. You're going to kill them all. They'll never recover. And so I started getting interested in barotrauma at the time, and that led me to study Rebecca Eberts up in Saskatchewan, had done a study on it, and I found some others. In fact, I just published an article a couple of days ago that will give you links to a half a dozen studies that were done in freshwater. One of them was an ice fishing study. Another one was a study regarding deep water walleyes on Rainy Lake, so on and so forth. And so those will all give you some basic understanding of what's going on out there. But the world that I live in, and when you had your interview with Aaron, the world that he lives in is the world of anecdotal information, right? The scientists want to study things and find out exactly what's going on. But a guy that's been fishing 40 years and has seen, you don't really need a study to tell you that if I hand you a hammer and say, hit that window, the window's going to break, right? We already know it, and we wouldn't need to have a study to do that. When barotrauma comes up in my boat, it's just like Dave said, there's so many variables and gray area that you can't just give somebody one answer and have it be the total answer. But what I can say is that if you want to do what's best for the fish, and this is a common thread no matter who you talk to on the subject, if you really want to do what's best for the fish, just avoid fishing for them in deep water and you'll be okay, or you'll be a lot better off. The exact number, we see fish that apparently do fine when we release them in 28 or 30 feet of water, but we also see fish that seem to be really traumatized when we catch them in shallower water, 22 to 24 feet. And for me, it seems to have something to do, and again, this is totally anecdotal, but it seems to have something to do with how much that fish wants to bite and how long it's been sitting in the spot. If you fish a spot maybe multiple times over the course of a month, and the fish have been laying in deep water. Every time you go there, they're always there. It seems like those fish are a little more susceptible. Folks that have ice fished a lot have had the experience. You drill the hole, you drop your lure down, and the lure is 6 feet below the ice, and you can already see the fish charging up from the bottom to grab it. Mm-hmm. When that fish is that hot to trot and they're coming after your lure, and it seems to be voluntary that they're coming up into that shallower water, they seem to do a lot better. So, how long the fish was there, how hard you have to work to get them to bite seems to influence it, and whether or not the fish is actually on the move by himself, or if you're, just teasing them out of that deep water. All of those things are bad. Before I let it slip out, the conversation that you were just having with Dave about fizzing, I was spring, and the subject came up, and Brad Parsons was at the meeting, and he pointed out that before you discuss in Minnesota, before you discuss fizzing, you should keep in mind that it's illegal to do. So whether it works or not, it's not allowed in Minnesota anyway, so it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up a couple of other things. One, I think, good point that Aaron brought up that was a good part of our discussion was calling. And I can't believe that calling is still allowed in Minnesota. I'm a little surprised at that, in that it's allowed in the winter. Jeff, what are your thoughts on being able to call walleyes or crappies?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm kind of like you. I wrote an article last spring, and I thought that culling was illegal. I didn't realize how to do it. And so I wrote something about seeing some guys doing it. And, of course, you know how this works. The first thing I get is an email from somebody pointing out to me the statute that says that culling is perfectly fine to do in Minnesota. And I don't know if that has always been that way or if it was changed. Somebody else suggested that it might have become law because of past tournament people that got it reversed. Maybe culling used to be illegal and then was reversed because of that. And that would require more research than what I've done on the subject. But personally, I think you should be fishing in situations where you're going to be happy with the fish that you catch. My ordinary day, I rarely ever come in with any one kind of species as a limit. I don't go out and spend my whole day fishing for walleyes, even after we've got fish in the live well. We just release them as we go. And so the idea that you need to cull, I think, is kind of foreign to me anyway. I would rather catch 5 or 6 walleyes and then go catch 5 or 6 crappies and then go catch 5 or 6 bass. Just kind of, I like the idea of showing folks what all the potential is of a lake or of the area, rather than just finding one spot and beating it silly. That's just me. That's a personal opinion and the way I like to do things. I know some folks like to do it a different way. Personally, I'd avoid calling unless there was some really compelling reason why, something totally caught you by surprise and you just found yourself in a situation where it didn't make any sense to not return a fish and trade it for another one. A good example of that might be in our region. There were a couple of lakes last year where the fish were reaching a length that was so close to the slot limit that it was really hard to measure them. And when you're getting into where you're looking at a 1/8 of an ounce or of an inch or a 1/4 of an inch difference, and maybe you got a questionable fish in your live well, and then you catch one that's well within the legal limits and you want to play it safe, make sure you're doing everything by the book. Okay, maybe it would be a good idea to release a fish occasionally and trade it for another one. But I would never see high grading as a legitimate excuse for culling. I would just release that fish as soon as I caught it and hope that I'm going to get a bigger one later.
I want to ask Dave a little bit about culling and some of the other methods used in that study, fin clips, things like that. But we got to go to the podcast. Hey, so if you're listening on the radio, thanks for listening. And if you want to hear more of this conversation, find us on YouTube or go to sportingjournalradio.com. All right, Dave, when it comes to the culling fish. Do you know how long it's been legal in Minnesota, or do you know much about that subject at all?
No, I don't know a ton about the history of that one.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just agree that it's probably not the best in most scenarios. But let's go back to the research done on barotrauma with crappies in particular. And one of the other subjects that came up criticizing the methods were the fish handling and keeping the fish out of the water, which you're doing a scientific study. You got to track these fish, right? You've got to take some measurements. You've got to do some things. One instance of criticism was surrounding the clipping of the fins. Explain the reason for doing that and the justification for it.
Yeah, so the fin clip was basically just a way for us to record a little bit of information about that fish that we could identify later. So, for example, if the fish showed obvious signs of barotrauma when it was caught, a certain part of the fin was clipped. If not, a different part of the fin was clipped. That let us identify that fish later. Keep in mind, this is a very small section of the fin that's removed, and fin clipping is very common for all kinds of different fisheries management purposes. We often take fin clips off live fish for running genetic studies. We do it to mark fish and marking studies. And there's never really been anything that's shown that that's detrimental to the fish. And I think as anglers, we all know this. How many times have you gone out and caught a really nice fish, but you noticed a third of its caudal fin was missing? The fish get beat up all the time, especially during the spawn. It's very common to see fish with eroded fins, and I'm not aware of that really contributing to higher mortality.
And then looking forward to this year, obviously the study is going to be ongoing. What do you plan? Any changes, or what do you think is planned for this year? And then how long will this continue to go, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of for this upcoming year, once we get good ice and good conditions, our goal is to go out and do some more trials at some of those deeper depths that are over 25 feet of water. But we're really intrigued by trying to figure out how much of a confounding factor the pen itself might be. So one way that we want to evaluate that is kind of have two pens set up, one with the same trial as we did last year, where we're just putting the fish in the pen, but have a second pen where we're using a descending device to get that fish down to depth quicker, just to see if we can tease out what impact the pen itself had. I think that would be very informative. We are going to try to refine our techniques a little bit to reduce the handling time. And then we're also going to avoid clipping or measuring the fish. We already were able to note that the fish that had obvious signs of barotrauma, when we put them in the pen, those tended to be the fish that were in trouble 24 hours later. We probably don't need to repeat that part of it. We also want to go from a 24-hour trial to a 48-hour trial to see if some of those fish that weren't dead but weren't fully recovered would recover given more time. And then we also want to attempt to track some fish just using forward-facing sonar and see if there's any merit in that methodology. And then finally, when we do observe some fish mortalities, we want to take those fish and necropsy them and see if we can determine what was physically what was the cause of death, what went wrong here.
I think finding this stuff out is just fascinating, and it's important research. And, you're going to learn as you go what works best and what doesn't work. I mean, that's all part of the process. So I think this is great. And I think you would also want to say, the other thing that was brought up was that maybe this, study that Aaron was real concerned about forward-facing sonar and the dangers of forward-facing sonar. Realistically, I don't know if forward-facing sonar was a concern of the DNRs or if that was maybe Angling Buzz's take on the situation. But it's probably safe to say that you're just trying to determine the effects barotrauma have at different depths, right? And then people need to understand what using technology can do. It's not a magic fish catcher, like I said last week, but it definitely helps you find fish. And I've definitely caught fish that I wouldn't have caught without having live forward-facing sonar. I love the live scope. I think it's great, yeah. But none of this research was done to try to implement any bans on any technology.
That's correct. It wasn't intended to broadly impose any kind of additional regulations, season changes, or limit the use of technology. In fact, I'd almost argue the opposite. Having this information is going to tell us just as much about where not to regulate as where to regulate. So, and I'll throw out an example. We might very well find that there's enough barotrauma that impacts the fishery that doing a reduced bag limit on a deeper lake with a popular deep water fishery would simply negate any gains we'd see by the special regulation. Maybe those lakes aren't the right lakes for a reduced bag limit of crappie. Maybe we want to focus on shallower lakes. So I think from a regulation standpoint, it might be able to help us fine tune our tools and determine, which lakes are most likely to benefit from a regulation, but it's not intended to take away anybody's ability to fish where they choose, harvest up to their legal limit, or use the technologies that they enjoy. And the reality is there's been discussions about technology is going to wreck fishing since the first green box came out 40 years ago. And it hasn't. Our fisheries are very resilient, but I do think that as the learning curve to learn how to locate the fish and catch the fish is shorter, and technology can do that. That's why we enjoy the technology, right? Because it makes it easier to find the fish. I think there is a certain amount of responsibility that comes with that. And the other thing I like to remind people, our fisheries in Minnesota are a natural resource. So there's nothing wrong with going out and harvesting some fish, having a fish dinner. We just have to be smart about how we harvest the fish. If we're harvesting the right sized fish under the right scenarios and the right amount of fish, the great news is the fishery is extremely sustainable and we can have high size quality. We just have to be a little bit smart and a little bit responsible about what we personally choose to take and when we choose to take it.
I think that's number one in all of this is people have to be personally responsible and they have to care about the fishery and they have to care about keeping the fishery sustainable and, not to over harvest. And I don't think any of us, and Jeff, maybe you can weigh on this too. I don't think any of us want to see any sort of, real restrictions put on anglers, more about education and people accepting responsibility from what they're doing out there. And I've got a lot of friends that are guides. I've done it. I'm not going to knock on the guides, but I think there are definitely some guide services out there that maybe take a couple extra trips each day out there. From a guide's perspective, Jeff, what do you think the future of say panfish regulations, how they should look?
Well, the first thing I want to say, I'm not a DNR biologist, but I have been participating in a lot of these work groups, and I know an awful lot of these folks, and I've been to a lot of meetings. And if there has been anybody throughout the last 15 or 20 years, if there's anybody that expresses concern about technology and wants to impose restrictions, it's not coming from the DNR. It's coming from our fellow anglers. It's one guy who likes the way he does it, but he doesn't like the way you do it. And so he wants you to stop your way and do it his way. And if there's any kind of movement at all with regard to the forward-facing sonar, it's coming from anglers, and it's not coming from the anglers that you'd expect. It's coming from anglers who know how to use the technology. And I think when you're familiar with it, it kind of scares you more than it scares the average angler out there, because you understand how powerful a tool it is when somebody else might just think it's a cool thing to use. It does maybe help a little bit and they can see the fish and it oohs and ahs, but not necessarily, they don't understand the full power that they've got at their fingertips. And the personal responsibility part of it, I think, is that's a common thread. And you notice when you go to my website, you don't get a pop-up ad trying to sell you something. You don't get redirected to a sponsor or anything. Like, I get up in the morning and I write that stuff and it's all for free, and anybody that wants to use it can use it. It's just plain information. It doesn't have anything to do with the commercial side of things. So to address some of your concerns, other guides that do 2 trips a day, that's been going on quite a while, by the way, but this definitely makes that easier. I can't tell them what to do. I can only influence the system by setting a good example. I do, and that's what I do. I try to do things as close to what makes good sense as I possibly can. And if some folks see that and pick up on it and follow along, that winds up being great. This barotrauma is a good example of that. You know, the panfish committee that Dave spoke about, I've been a volunteer on that committee, and I've mentioned barotrauma several times over the years. I've written about it for a long time. For maybe 8 or 10 years, it seemed like nobody really cared about it, and all of a sudden now it's hitting the mainstream news. It's kind of, everybody's talking about it. It took a long time, but just simply putting the information out there is enough to get people thinking. And then if you get enough people doing that, everybody's thinking, what's best for the fishery? How can I make a little bit better than it was when I found it? Then down the road, you don't have people pushing and shoving, trying to be the first in line to reduce a bag limit or ban some sort of electronics. And when you get the responsibility that comes with using all this stuff, like Dave said, the way I look at it, the biggest responsibility we have is just to ourselves. Yeah. Because all of us just want to go out and catch more fish. It doesn't have anything to do with goal than that. We all just want good fishing, right? And you want your fishing to go the way you want it to go, and I want mine to go the way I want it to go. But none of it works if we don't sustain the fish populations, and we can do that. We can help with that just by going out. A good example being a proper role model for our fellow anglers, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the one thing, you know, when I don't want to keep going back to Aaron's video, but his concern may not rest with, say, the DNR, particularly the biologists, the guys out there doing the work who are probably fishing on their days off. But when you have, and I don't want to talk about crossbows, I know Dan does, but I mean, no. When you have a situation where lawmakers just changed the law and really the DNR didn't really have much say in that, that's where the worry is. And when you see other states appointing heads of game management agencies that are maybe have different viewpoints than hunters and anglers, that's a serious issue. And that's a road no one wants to go down, and we don't want to see that happen here in Minnesota. So there is a legitimate concern about making sure that we're not making forward-facing sonar the enemy, but education, I think, is important so that we understand and hold ourselves accountable to know that if we do get on a really good bite and that forward-facing sonar is helping us not to exploit that opportunity while we're out there. Dave, I want to talk about if there's anything else about this barotrauma study that we've left out, feel free to bring it up here or anything else you want to say about it. But I kind of want to just, before we let you go, we're running out of time here, but before we let you guys go, I just broadly want to talk about panfish management in the state of Minnesota. And we touched on the quality bluegill initiative, quality sunfish. Where are we at with all of that right now? And what just briefly summarize that work that you've been doing around panfish in the recent years?
Yeah, it's actually been an extremely exciting time for panfish management in Minnesota. I've personally seen a lot of fisheries that are in very good shape that, over the last 10 or 15 years around Grand Rapids have actually even improved in terms of size, quality. And one of the biggest drivers that's contributing to that, and we know this through some of our mail-in surveys that are conducted with the University of Minnesota, but also through some of our work group efforts and other outreach efforts, is that we're finding that anglers really value at least some opportunities to catch large panfish. And that wasn't always the case. When I started my career, I think panfish were primarily valued for the harvest of panfish, but attitudes have slowly changed over time. So people are more willing to think about maybe trying some experimental regulations on lakes, or even on lakes that don't have experimental regulations. They're thinking about whether or not they actually need to harvest their full limit of fish. In reality, if everybody was to agree to only limit themselves to the amount of fish they needed for a meal at one time, we probably wouldn't need a lot of special regulations. because harvest would be essentially taking care of itself through voluntary efforts. But as far as where we're at with like our bluegill, we're pretty happy with how that program ended up working out. It was a long effort that really started with this panfish work group. I think we reformed a work group back around 2015. And at that time, we asked the members, what's the number one concern you have just with panfish in general across the state of Minnesota? And they felt that it was the number of lakes that had big bluegill had declined, or maybe they weren't finding the big fish that they used to, or that the lakes that did have big bluegill, they felt had an increase in fishing pressure. So they really asked us to focus on what could be done for bluegill. So we talked, really over a 3-year period about every option under the sun, whether it be seasons or statewide limit changes. But ultimately, what we decided is that bluegill fisheries are different. Not every lake has the right ingredients to produce big bluegills. And maybe we should focus on the lakes that have the best ingredients to produce a big bluegill. So we asked our biologists to identify lakes in their work areas that could potentially benefit from a reduced bag limit. And we came up with a list of about 150 lakes. Well, that's only half of the puzzle, because for a regulation to work, it needs to have the biological potential to make a difference, but it also needs social support. Our goal is to provide fisheries that people value, not necessarily to have that fishery produce its maximized or its maximum.
No, did we lose him? Oh, there he is. All right. Yeah, you were saying you were basically talking about you don't want to manage the lake just for the biggest fish. You want to manage the lake for the best angler opportunity.
Yeah, correct. It does us no good to produce fish that people don't enjoy. So to understand that, we need to know how people value the fisheries. And what we found is that on a lot of lakes that did have big bluegill, people valued catching big bluegill, and they were willing to keep fewer fish if that meant that fishery could be maintained. So ultimately, we proposed 5 or 10 fish bag limits on about 150 lakes around the state, and ended up moving forward with new regulations in 20 and 21 on 146 of those lakes. So if you add that to the existing list, before that we had 57 lakes. We're at about 200 lakes right now that have a special regulation for bluegill, which is right within that original goal that we set for ourselves based on what the biology was telling us. But again, our goal is to really meet that intersection where the biological potential and the angler values intersect. That's where good fisheries management occurs, and that's our goal.
Have you had a chance to see any results yet, or when will you start to look at how these regulations are affecting the fish?
Yeah, I should back up. Prior to this Quality Sunfish Initiative, there were about 60 lakes around the state that had already gone through some period of time with the special regulation. About 20 of them had the regulation on for a long enough time that we could evaluate them. And sure enough, it seemed like a 10 fish bag limit was maintaining good size quality in lakes that already had good size quality. And with a 5 fish limit, we actually saw some improvement. So we did have a small set of lakes that were kind of a pilot that would suggest that these limits were appropriate. Now we've expanded that to nearly 150 new lakes. The plan there is that we've already collected a couple of years of pre-regulation data on those lakes. So we know what the population looked like before the regulation went into effect. We'll do probably a mid-regulation checkpoint at about 5 years. But the real interesting information will occur in about the 10th and 11th year, when we hope to do back-to-back surveys on these lakes. That way we can look at the population 10 years after the regulation's been around and compare it to how it looked before the regulation went into effect to determine if those regulation goals were actually met or not.
And that 10-year is important because that's generally what it takes to grow up a trophy-sized, what's considered a trophy-sized bluegill, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Generally speaking, they only grow about an inch a year. So in a lot of lakes, a quality 8-inch bluegill is 8 years old. And in most of our lakes, they can live to be 10 years old. We do see some teenage fish, but about a 10-year lifespan is typical for a bluegill.
All right. Well, it's interesting stuff, and I'm excited to be a part of it this year to learn about anything more we can learn about barotrauma, all the stuff that we can learn, and finding the best methods to determine the research and how to figure it all out. Dave, I appreciate the time here on the show, and I'm assuming we can find out more about this information on the DNR website.
I'm not sure if we have anything dedicated to the barotrauma stuff. It is part of our outreach
Maybe that's
plan.
on the Angling Buzz website then, I bet. Is that where we saw it, Dan?
Yeah,
You had it pulled up earlier.
Probably.
But like the QBI, QSI stuff, that's out there as well?
Yep, we have a sunfish page that's one of the sub pages of the DNR webpage. But the other thing that I like to remind our stakeholders is we have 29 area fisheries offices that are spread out through the state of Minnesota. Give us a call. There's nothing that we like better than hearing from our stakeholders, and hearing from them directly. It helps us out tremendously when we're putting together things like our lake management plans. So feel free to look us up, give us a call. We'd love to talk to you.
All right. And Jeff Sundin, I appreciate you coming on. And is there anything you would like to add about this research or the future of panfish management in Minnesota?
Well, not so much that, but you touched on the education and the personal responsibility. And I want to thank you for having this program and the ongoing discussion, because this is part of the education process, and folks that do their best to give both sides of the story and try to get the accurate information out there, I think helped everybody. You have to be a little careful. The one thing that concerned me about some of the trends we've seen lately in public commentary are if you make a declaration that it's safe to release a fish in 35 feet of water, there's a lot of folks out there that are using that information to justify their behavior. They're using that because what they want to do is go out and fish because it's easy. And so anybody that says it's okay, they're going to say, see, he said it's okay, so now I'm going to do it. And I think that's part of our personal responsibility as educators to make sure that when we do put information out there, it's accurate and it's meaningful and people can take it to the bank and rely on it, because a lot of the things that happen in fisheries, when you mention the legislature getting involved, they don't just wake up in the morning and decide to do that. Somebody plants that seed in their brain and then they go and take action on it. And like I said earlier, when you're talking about the DNR, particularly when you're talking about the field people, the biologists and the scientists, the people that are out in the field doing this stuff, they're not interested in figuring out how to get rid of fishing. That may exist someplace in the organization, but it's within the tall buildings, not out on the shore of the lake. So I maybe sound like I'm defending the DNR, and I am, because I kind of know the difference and I've seen how the two different halves of it work. And don't leave these field guys in the dust just because you think that somebody down in St. Paul is making a bad decision once in a while.
I totally agree with that. That's a great way to say it. The guys in the tall buildings.
I know. I like that.
I love it. And I will, that's one thing I criticized Aaron a little bit about, because, and to his credit, he did say many times in his video, don't fish deep. But in this day and age of short attention spans and the comments that we have gotten, my gosh, all the people that are big fans of his have just, it's been an onslaught of comments, and some good, some not so good, some interesting ones. But so many of them had that message that, well, he released them safely. It's fine. We can fish in deep water if we get the air out of the mouth and give them a little nudge, then they're going to be fine. And defending Aaron a little bit, I think he was trying to show that, hey, don't do it. If you do it, this can be a measure that you can take as almost like a descending device last resort type measure to help that fish survive. Here are some fish handling measures. But again, a lot of people didn't take that message. They took that it was okay to fish deep, and that was the issue that we had as well. So, man, guys, this has been great. I think we could have this conversation for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, but I really appreciate both of you guys coming on, and I'm looking forward to more research being done and, and learning more and keeping people in the know and understanding that they're responsible. They are ultimately the ones responsible for the future of hunting and fishing. There's management agencies and lawmakers, but it's the people out there doing it and making sure that they do it the right way that are going to ensure that we have a future doing what we love to do. So Dave Weitzel and Jeff Sundin, appreciate the time on the show, guys.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Macaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.